page, you don't mind if we start while you're eating. I don't care if you eat, get up and walk around, I'm fine with that. We want to get into it, and only because I'm sitting here and I'm thinking we do have some desk officers in here and new Noble Grands and Vice Grands who should know the task of the officers who serve in the lodge. And if you look on page 24, 25, and 26, you don't have to go there now, but it's there. Under duties as secretary, financial secretary, and treasurer. The best place to go to find those duties is in the Roberts Code of Oddfellows Laws. And we gave away 2 of those manuals yesterday. It has those duties listed in the code, not just in your manual. It's also listed, very basically, it's listed in your ritual or your charge book, the red book, and it's also listed, duties of these officers, it's also listed in your Code of General Laws. Every lodge should have your Code of General Laws out on the secretary's desk or somewhere near the desk. Should have the rituals, naturally, for your meeting, and then your Roberts Code of Oddfellows Laws in California. Those should all be available to every member to look at during a meeting, okay? As your financial records are too. As your 990s are as well. As your bylaws, when you join the lodge, you can request to have a set of bylaws. Should be no problem getting any of that access to any of that paperwork, okay? You are a member. No member is above another member. So these books, these papers, they're all available to you. If they're not, you send a letter to the Grand Master and you tell them those aren't being made available to you. That's how we correct that. Or go through your district's deputies. We're going to break away from the agenda a little bit. I'm going to ask for a volunteer, 3 volunteers. I'm going to ask for a treasurer, a financial secretary, and a secretary. Don't worry, it's really fast. In fact, you're going to read out of the ritual instead of memorizing. I have 3 seats up here. Don't make me pick someone.
We have a financial secretary, Peter.
Oh, come on up.
Volunteer.
Brian, Pat, what do you want to be?
Financial secretary.
Okay, what do you want to be? Treasurer, perfect. We're going to go to duties of officers. So we're going to opening the lodge in your ritual, or in your charge book. There are some nuances that some of us miss. A lot of lodges don't pick up on it. Secretary?
Yes.
What is your duty on page 4?
To keep accurate records of the transactions of the lodge.
Thank you. Financial secretary, what is your duty?
To keep correctly the accounts between the lodge and its members, receive all money. To keep correctly the accounts between the lodge and its members, receive all monies due the lodge unless otherwise provided, and to pay the same to the treasurer at the end of each regular session.
Treasurer, what is your duty?
To have charge of the funds of the lodge, to be correct, careful, and honest, secure the lodge against any loss or possibility lost by me or through me, to pay all orders drawn on me by the Noble Grand, testify the secretary, and to keep accurate accounts of the lodge can be informed of its financial conditions at any time.
Thank you. You guys are seated. Okay. You notice what they did. Normally in our lodge, the secretary doesn't stand. The secretary continues to update their book. That's the way I was taught when I came through, and everyone's reading their duties and their charges. The secretary remains seated, and we don't mind if the treasurer, they're in the middle of their work, that they stay seated. Now that's your preference of your lodge or your Noble Grand. The other thing, if you do not have a financial secretary, there's a little fine print on page 4, okay? On page 4, it's important for you to know this because about half our lodges don't have financial secretaries. So what do? Who reads the financial? Who takes over that duty?
The recording secretary.
Absolutely, the secretary. The secretary can read that charge or memorize or recite that charge. The secretary takes the duty of the financial secretary. Because the financial secretary and treasurer often sit together, sometimes the treasurer's taking that role. That isn't the case here. Your secretary picks up the role of the financial secretary. So the fine print is very important in this book. I have used the fine print to make clarifications. Remember yesterday I mentioned trials will be done in the initiatory degree? That's in here, okay? It conflicts a little bit with the way our trials are laid out, but it's in here in the fine print, as well as a pass grant, qualified pass grant, toward the end of the book, being permitted to install a lodge, a qualified pass grant. Okay, that's in the ritual too. So there are things you need to be aware of. Read the fine print. The fine print allows you to do many, many things. It's what I used when we had to legislate conferring degrees in one day, doing 3 degrees, multiple degrees, without a dispensation from your district deputy or grandmaster. We voted on that, we legislated that. Now we can do degrees without a dispensation. That's in the print of this ritual as well. So read the fine print. It'll give you an advantage. And with that, while they're sitting up here, I'm going to read the duties of the officers right out of your manual, or just sort of highlight the items on page 24. Hopefully you have the same page number that I do. My binder's a little different. Page 24, the manual. Great. Okay, duties of secretary. The secretary is a recording officer of the lodge and has a responsibility for keeping record in form of minutes every meeting in the lodge, writes and receives all official communication and presents the same to the lodge at the next meeting or to the Noble Grant prior to the meeting if earlier action seems advisable. I'm going to stop there because when your mail comes to your lodge, your secretary is supposed to open that mail. Okay? Not the Noble Grant, not the inside guardian, not the building manager, not the people within your lodge, because that creates chaos and things get lost. The secretary is the point person. I know you're going to be a secretary. The secretary is the point person of that lodge. The secretary opens that mail. For those financial items, the bank statements, the secretary knows makes the entry in his or her book on what that balance is. Out of that, you have a little column on your minute book. Some of you use paper. Just write down the total out of that checking statement at the end of that month. Keep track. That's part of your checks and balances. The secretary then makes the entries of the dues payments, believe it or not. There's usually a provision. I know the encampment has it. I know the Rebecca's have it at the bottom of their minute book. You make a little entry. Who paid dues? Who sent the dues check? The secretary writes that down as well, and then takes those checks over to, give those to the financial secretary and treasurer, so they can handle those checks and the financial secretary can make those entries on who paid dues, because that's his or her responsibility. Issuing those dues cards, getting the secretary to sign those dues cards. The treasurer needs to get those checks deposited. So it's a mechanism. So the secretary is the point person to disseminate that communication. And as I mentioned yesterday, if you have a secretary like ours, all the paperwork will be put out on a desk or a table for all of the members to view what they need to view and what they wish to view. Because not everything, as we know, not everything or everything is read in a lodge meeting. Okay, either you're going to have 45 minutes of reading communications or you're going to have 5 minutes. Okay, all of those correspondence should be made available to you. Okay, remember we still have the question pad over there if you have any questions. Correspondence should be read in the following sequence: Sovereign Grand Lodge, IARA, Grand Lodge and Rebecca Assembly, districts, lodges, members, non-members, and advertisements. Membership records are a vital part of the Secretary's duties. A current roster should be kept showing the membership record and mailing address of each member. The record should include date, initiated date, dates of degrees were received, as well as rank and service record for as offices held in the lodge. Now, the Secretary sees something that is sent by Sovereign Grand Lodge, and now they're asking those to be mailed back to the Grand Lodges rather than Sovereign Grand Lodge, but they're a packet, depending on the size of your lodge. They can be that thick or that thin, but they list the history of each member. I know those of you that are secretaries have seen this, and what it is, the secretaries every year have to go through this and make corrections. So Sovereign sends this out from its database, and it's asking each secretary to update those records, whether or not that's a past grand, when your join date is. Everything's kept on a database at Sovereign Grand Lodge. And most of you don't know that, but the secretaries do, because the secretary is tasked with updating those records. And in a larger lodge, 50 members, 100 members, that could be quite a task. And it can take a little while, and most of the time you're just making sure the addresses and information and name spelling, those things are correct. We just started at, okay, let's make sure their highest office, they have a little line there, their highest office is made in those entries as well. That's probably not in this book here, but that's sent to all the lodges as well. So know that the secretaries, if they're doing their jobs, are doing a little bit more that's listed in the duties. The secretary can be a tremendous factor in the success of any lodge, and by cooperating with the Noble Grand and committee chairman, you can coordinate all activities of the lodge. If there's no financial secretary, then that officer's duties are done by the secretary. I'm glad it's in. Suggestions for secretaries, you guys can take a look at that. I mentioned where in the code, in all your code books, the duties of your officers, okay? And you heard the duties of your officers here. They recited their responsibilities and to the lodge. Take that seriously, okay? The secretary, the treasurer, the financial secretary, sometimes you get a pro temp. That pro temp should act in the same exact manner as the office they're taking for that evening. Okay, sometimes we can't have the pro temp write on a separate piece of paper, and that can be just transcribed into the books at the next meeting or when that officer returns. Duties of treasurer. I'm skipping financial secretary because that financial secretary handles the dues cards and keeps track of our membership paying dues. Duties of the treasurer. The treasurer is the chief financial officer of the lodge and must receive all monies from the secretary or financial secretary, if there is one, and maintain the checking account. Okay? Treasurer needs to know what's in your checking account. Okay? That's the responsibility of your treasurer. Your treasurer is in charge of those funds. Okay? You should be able to ask the treasurer, how much do we have in our account? And that answer should be readily available. Okay? At the beginning of the meeting and at the end of the meeting. I'm going to go to order of business. I need to point something out under order of business. When we call for the report of the financial committee, you know that's something totally different than your desk officers. don't you? Okay? You know that. You know you have at least 3 on the financial committee that are appointed each January or at the subsequent meeting after the installation. The Noble Grand appoints 3 members of the lodge to be part of the financial committee. The financial committee has a specific task, and I believe their task, and the code changed on this, almost like it did for trustees. I think they have to report to California every 2 months? Once every 2 months, is that correct?
Every quarter, I think.
Every quarter, okay. Now, you can correct me, I'm not going to state in stone, but the financial committee is asked every meeting for a report. Most of the time it doesn't have a report. But that financial committee should also be aware of the bills that are being written, also be aware of how much we have in our accounts, like the treasurer. Need to be, our financial committee keeps track of our budget. Remember, I heard another speaker speak about budgets. Budgets are great for lodges. Budgets are great, forecast is another proper term, but we forecast our entire year's payments. And that's how we don't have a lot of money in our lodge, in Yerba Buena. We're very tight, but we're very efficient. We can do so much because we follow a budget. We know exactly where we are throughout the year. There's no surprises. Very few, no surprises. That's what the financial committee in our lodge reviews. Did we overpay? Are we within our budget? Are we ahead? For example, our financial committee in the lodge should know that our installation dinner came $1,000 under budget. So that should be in the next report of our financial committee. So those types of things, your financial committee is separate from these 3 offices. Okay? Simple. Okay. Who reads receipts and disbursements?
Financial secretary.
Financial secretary. And the treasurer should be in on that too. Okay?
He's supposed to agree with me.
Yeah. He's supposed to agree. They're supposed to agree. Their numbers are supposed to match.
Because we're supposed to be.
We need to know the starting number or starting balance for that evening in our treasury. Okay? And we're supposed to read all the expenditures, depending how you set up. You could have receipts first. That could be in the way of outside investment checks. Then you have dues checks, how much you received in dues. And then you have disbursements, which subtract from that total. And then it gives you a subtotal. And that's what we need to know at the end of the lodge, because their report comes over here after the meeting and is put into his book, because he has to have that in his record. They're all doing checks and balances. He opens the mail. He gets the bank statements. He gets everything, your Morgan Stanley statement. He gets everything. He opens it. He makes notes in his book. He takes those things over here, the checks, the bank statements. He puts it on their desk, okay, or his desk, depending if you don't have if you only have a treasurer. All those checks and everything come over here. The treasurer makes all those entries. The financial secretary makes all the entries, dealing with membership, dealing with the starting balance, dealing with the ending balance, and so does the treasurer. And what they do is they're doing your checks and balances. They're all making sure the record's balanced. You get this? They're all involved. They're not separate entities. Okay, they know. You've done your checks and balances. Make sure your officers are communicating. Make sure they're sharing all their information. Make sure the mail is being opened by your secretary and being disseminated. Okay? And nobody else in that lodge is opening that mail unless One of these are, this one's absent. In your Noble Grand, these officers can open that mail and handle business. Does it make sense? Makes sense. Believe it or not, a few out here needed that. Not in a way of criticism, but just to point that out. Again, Code of General Laws. I know all of you don't have a copy of this. What do you say, it costs $65 now? You know, but your lodge must have one. Your lodge must have an updated Code of General Laws. You must have an updated code book for your jurisdiction so you can see those duties. They're spelled out.
Can we get that online?
You can get the Roberts Code of Oddfellow Laws online. In fact, that's right now I have it on my phone. I mean, I was looking up some. You can find it quickly on the California website for the Oddfellows. I'd like to thank these volunteers for coming up here and doing this for us. Thank you, Jack. Thanks, Jeff.